Welcome to English Through Great Stories. Today's episode is called Why Smart People Sometimes Make Bad Decisions. Find a comfortable place, take a slow breath, and let the story begin. Imagine a room full of the most brilliant minds in the world. Engineers with decades of experience, scientists who have built rockets, leaders who have guided some of history's greatest achievements. Now imagine that every single one of them is about to make a catastrophic mistake. Not because they are careless, not because they are ignorant, but precisely because they believe with total certainty that they are right. This is not a story about stupidity. This is a story about something far more dangerous and far more human. This is a story about the invisible traps that exist inside brilliant minds, the cracks that intelligence itself can sometimes create, and why understanding these traps might be the most important thing you ever learn. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Intelligence. For most of human history, we have worshipped intelligence. We have built schools, universities, and libraries to celebrate it. We give awards to the smartest people. We elect them to lead our governments. We trust them with our hospitals, our bridges, our children's futures. In many ways, this makes perfect sense. Intelligence solves problems. Intelligence drives progress. Intelligence saves lives. But intelligence also creates a very particular kind of illusion, the illusion of certainty, the feeling that because you understand something deeply, because you have studied it, mastered it, lived with it for years, you cannot possibly be wrong about it. And that feeling, that quiet, unshakable confidence, is where the danger begins. Think about what intelligence really is. It is a tool, a powerful, extraordinary tool. But a tool is only as good as the hands that hold it and the mind that directs it. A sharp knife in a surgeon's hand can save a life. The same knife, in the wrong moment, used with too much confidence, without enough caution, can cause irreparable harm. Psychologists have a name for this dangerous feeling. They call it the illusion of understanding, the gap between how well we think we know something and how well we actually know it. It works like this. Ask someone, a smart, educated, well-read person, to explain in detail how a common household object works. A toilet, for example, or a zipper. They will say confidently that they understand it perfectly. But ask them to explain it step by step, and something remarkable happens. They hesitate, they stumble, they realize with genuine surprise that they understood far less than they thought. This is not a failure of ordinary people. Experts experience this illusion too, and sometimes even more powerfully. The more you know about a subject, the more your brain builds shortcuts. This is patterns, assumptions, and those shortcuts can be your greatest strength in familiar situations. But in new, unexpected, or complex situations, those same shortcuts can lead you directly into a trap. Chapter 2. The Trap of Overconfidence. In the year 1720, one of the greatest scientific minds in history made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His name was Isaac Newton, the man who discovered gravity, who changed our understanding of the universe forever, who was, without any question, one of the most intelligent human beings who had ever lived. Newton invested heavily in a British company called the South Sea Company. Everyone around him was investing. Prices were rising rapidly. The excitement was electric. The promise was enormous. and Newton, with all of his extraordinary intelligence, watched the share prices climb and felt the same thing that every other investor felt: desire, hope, the dangerous certainty that this time the numbers would keep going up. He had actually sold his shares early, making a reasonable profit. But then the prices rose further, and he bought back in at a much higher price. When the South Sea bubble finally collapsed, as all financial bubbles eventually do, Newton lost the equivalent of millions in today's money. He was reportedly so shaken that he refused to allow the words South Sea to be spoken in his presence for the rest of his life. He is said to have written, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Here was a man who could map the movement of planets across centuries, who could hold the laws of the universe in his head like music, and yet could not protect himself from the oldest trap of all, wanting something to be true so badly that he stopped questioning whether it actually was. Overconfidence is not the same as arrogance, though the two can look similar from the outside. Arrogance says, "I am better than you." Overconfidence says something quieter, more internal, more seductive. "I know enough. I have seen enough. I have been right before, so I will be right again." It is the assumption that your past success is proof of your future judgment. And history shows us, again and again, that this assumption can be deadly. Chapter 3. When Emotion Takes the Wheel. For a long time, scientists and philosophers believed that emotion was the enemy of good thinking, that to make the best decisions you needed to remove all feelings from the process, to become, as much as possible, like a machine, cold, logical, precise. This idea is ancient and deeply embedded in how we think about reason and rationality. Then a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio made a discovery that changed everything. He studied patients who had suffered damage to a specific part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for emotional processing. These patients were, in every measurable way, still highly intelligent. They could reason through complex problems. They could understand logic perfectly. They could analyze situations with clarity. But they could not make decisions. Even simple everyday choices, what to eat for lunch, which appointment to schedule first, became impossible. Without their emotions, these people were paralyzed. Damasio concluded something remarkable. Emotions are not the enemy of rational thought. They are a fundamental part of it. They provide the sense of value, the feeling of urgency, the signal that tells us what actually matters. But here is the tension at the heart of human decision-making. We need emotions to decide, but the wrong emotion at the wrong moment can hijack our thinking entirely. Fear makes us too cautious when boldness is needed. Excitement makes us too bold when caution is needed. Anger makes us reactive. Grief makes us passive. And love, deep, genuine, powerful love, can make us see what simply is not there. Think about a leader who has spent 20 years building a company. Every brick represents a piece of their life, their sleepless nights, their sacrifices, their identity. When someone tells them the company must change direction radically, what do they feel? Threatened, protective. And those feelings, powerful as they are, can make even brilliant leaders refuse to see what is right in front of them. Chapter 4. The Echo Chamber. In the early 2000s, Nokia was one of the most powerful companies in the world. Its mobile phones were everywhere, in offices, in kitchens, in the pockets of billions of people across every continent. Its engineers were talented, its leaders were experienced, it had enormous financial resources. By almost every measure, Nokia was untouchable. And yet, within just a few years, Apple and then Android would transform the mobile phone industry entirely. Nokia, the giant, would collapse with a speed that stunned the entire business world. How did this happen? How could such intelligent, experienced, well-resourced people fail to see what was coming? Researchers who later studied Nokia's internal culture found a powerful and destructive pattern. The company had created an echo chamber, an environment where dissenting voices were systematically silenced, not through cruelty, but through something subtler. A culture of not wanting to disagree, of loyalty above honesty, of not wanting to be the person who stood up and said, "I think we are wrong." Middle managers at Nokia reportedly knew the company was in danger. They saw the signs and understood that the smartphone revolution was not a distant possibility, but an immediate reality. But they were afraid to tell their superiors. And so the truth traveled upward in whispers, softened and diluted, until by the time it reached the top, it had lost all its power to alarm. This is the echo chamber, a space where only one idea gets oxygen, where agreement feels like wisdom and disagreement feels like betrayal. Smart people, especially successful ones, are dangerously prone to building them, because success reinforces belief, and belief, left unchallenged long enough, hardens into dogma. There is a related phenomenon called groupthink. It happens when the desire for harmony within a group becomes so strong that it overrides the ability to think clearly. Members start to self-censor, stop questioning the dominant view, and begin to believe the group cannot be wrong, because it is made up of intelligent, capable people. But intelligence and correctness are not the same thing. A room full of brilliant people who all believe the same idea does not make that idea true. It simply makes it louder. And louder, as history has shown us many times, is not the same as right. Chapter 5. Blind Spots and Hidden Biases. In 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch conducted one of the most famous experiments in the history of science. He gathered groups of people in a room and showed them a simple image, 3 lines of clearly different lengths. He then asked them which line matched a 4th line shown separately. The correct answer was completely obvious. Anyone with normal vision could see it immediately. But here was the secret. All the other people in the room were actors, confederates working with Asch. And they had been instructed to give the wrong answer, confidently, cheerfully, unanimously. When the real participant heard everyone around them confidently state the wrong answer, something remarkable happened. About 75% of participants went along with the group at least once. They denied the evidence of their own eyes rather than be the lone dissenting voice. Afterwards, when Asch interviewed participants, their explanations were revealing. Some said they genuinely started to doubt what they had seen. Others said they knew the group was wrong, but felt it was not worth the discomfort of disagreeing. Either way, the result was the same. Social pressure had overridden individual judgment. And this was not a room full of weak or uneducated people. These were ordinary, intelligent adults. We all carry biases, invisible lenses that shape what we see, what we remember, what we believe. Psychologists have catalogued hundreds of them. The confirmation bias, our deep tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe and to ignore information that challenges it. The availability bias, our habit of judging how likely something is based on how easily we can remember an example of it. These biases are features of how all human brains work, shortcuts that served our ancestors well on the African savanna, where quick pattern recognition and tribal loyalty meant survival. But in today's complex, fast-changing world, these ancient shortcuts can misfire with devastating consequences. Chapter 6. The Pressure to Decide. There is a particular kind of pressure that exists at the highest levels of power, the pressure to decide, to appear decisive, confident, and certain, even when the situation is genuinely uncertain. Leaders who hesitate are seen as weak. Leaders who change their minds are called inconsistent. And so a dangerous incentive is created. Be confident, even when you are not. Be certain, even when the evidence is unclear. This pressure is not only political. It exists in hospitals, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, and in family kitchens. Everywhere that people are watching and waiting for someone to say, "I know the answer, follow me." The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent his career studying how humans think and decide. His Nobel Prize-winning research described two systems of thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, and intuitive. The part of your mind that knows instantly how to ride a bicycle, that recognizes a familiar face in a crowd, and that senses danger before you have consciously processed why. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and effortful. It works through complex problems carefully, step by step. It is powerful but exhausting. And so our brains take the easier path and rely on System 1 whenever they can. The problem Kahneman found is that System 1, fast, confident, effortless, makes the same kinds of mistakes again and again. It sees patterns that do not exist, confuses familiarity with truth, and mistakes the ease of remembering something with the probability of it being true. And crucially, it does all of this with total confidence. System 1 does not know what it does not know. Under pressure, time constraints, emotional stress, or the watchful eyes of an audience, we rely on System 1 even more. And here is where intelligent people face a particular danger. Smart people have usually been rewarded for their fast thinking their whole lives. From the quick answer in class to the decisive call in a meeting. Speed and correctness have gone together so many times that the link feels unbreakable. Their intuition has a track record, and that track record becomes a trap. Think about what happens each time a smart person's intuition turns out to be right. Every fast decision that works becomes a piece of evidence. Evidence that their instincts can be trusted, that they see things others miss. Over time, they stop checking their own thinking. The very confidence that intelligence builds, the quiet certainty that comes from years of being right, is what makes the next mistake so hard to see coming. The trap is not stupidity. It is a track record. The most dangerous intuitions are the ones that have been right 9 times before, because the 10th time, when the situation is genuinely different, when the old pattern no longer holds, feels exactly the same as all the others. This is why the most experienced people in a field can sometimes be the last to recognize that something has fundamentally changed. Chapter 7. Famous Failures, Real Stories. On the morning of January 28, 1986, The Space Shuttle Challenger launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was a cold morning, unusually cold for that region, even for January. 73 seconds after launch, the shuttle broke apart. All 7 crew members died. The world watched in horror. For NASA, it was the darkest day in its history. What followed was a painful investigation. It uncovered not a technical failure alone, but a human failure of the most profound kind. Engineers at Morton Fire Call had raised serious concerns the night before the launch. They knew that critical rubber rings called O-rings had never been tested at such low temperatures. They believed the launch was unsafe. They tried to say so, but the pressure was immense. The launch had already been delayed multiple times. There was a teacher on board, Krista McAuliffe, chosen to be the first civilian in space, a symbol of hope and public engagement. The whole nation was watching, and in that atmosphere of expectation, the engineers' warnings were met with frustration, skepticism, and the institutional weight of a program that had always succeeded before. One NASA manager is reported to have said to the engineers, "Take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat." In other words, stop thinking like a scientist, start thinking like someone who needs this launch to go ahead. And so the engineers, under enormous pressure, exhausted and outnumbered, eventually gave their reluctant approval. The next morning, in temperatures far below what had ever been tested, the O-rings failed, and 7 people died. The Challenger disaster stands as one of history's most documented examples of what happens when the pressure to decide overwhelms the wisdom to wait. When intelligence is overruled not by greater intelligence, but by the weight of an organization that has always succeeded before, and the human terror of being wrong in front of the world. Consider a very different kind of story. In the late 1990s, a company called Enron was celebrated as one of the most innovative corporations in America. Its leaders were profiled in magazines as visionaries. Its stock price was soaring. It was ranked year after year as one of Fortune magazine's most admired companies. People spoke about Enron the way they later spoke about Apple or Google, with a kind of breathless, almost religious admiration. The people who ran Enron were genuinely intelligent. Many had Ivy League degrees. They had read the books and understood the theories. And yet they built one of the largest corporate frauds in history. Not simply out of greed, but out of a culture where appearing smart had become more important than being honest, and where the performance of intelligence had replaced the substance of it. Enron rated employees every 6 months and fired the bottom performers, a policy called, with chilling corporate cheerfulness, rank and yank. The result was a culture where admitting a mistake was career suicide, and saying, "I don't know," was weakness. Problems were hidden, losses were disguised, and the truth was buried under layers of careful, calculated dishonesty. When Enron collapsed in 2001, thousands of employees lost their savings and pensions. The damage was not caused by people who lacked intelligence, but by people who lacked the courage to use that intelligence honestly. Chapter 8. How to Think Better. So what is the answer? If intelligence alone does not protect us from bad decisions, and if the confidence that comes from expertise can sometimes make things worse, what can we do? The answer is not to become less intelligent or to reject expertise. It is something more nuanced and in many ways more difficult. It is to become more aware. The ancient Greeks valued something we might call intellectual humility, the understanding that our knowledge is always incomplete and that the world will always be more surprising than we expect. This does not mean doubting everything. It means holding your beliefs with enough flexibility to change them when the evidence demands it. One of the most powerful practices for better thinking is called pre-mortem thinking. Instead of asking after a failure, what went wrong, you ask before the decision. Imagine it is 1 year from now and this plan has failed completely. What most likely caused that? This shift in perspective forces your brain to look for the cracks and weaknesses that enthusiasm and confidence tend to hide, before it is too late to do anything about them. Great organizations also learn to actively seek out dissenting voices, not merely to tolerate disagreement, but to treasure it, to treat the person who says, "Wait, I think we might be wrong about this," not as a threat, but as an invaluable resource. Some military organizations assign a specific role called devil's advocate, someone whose job is to argue against the prevailing view no matter what, not because they necessarily believe it, but because the act of challenging an idea makes that idea stronger or reveals its fatal flaws. Kahneman himself acknowledged that knowing about biases does not make you immune to them. You cannot simply read about the confirmation bias and then stop favoring evidence that supports your existing beliefs. The biases are too deep, too fast, too automatic for that. What you can do is build systems and habits that slow you down at critical moments and create space for doubt before a decision becomes irreversible. In many cultures, admitting that you do not know something is treated as weakness. But consider the opposite view, that saying, "I'm not sure," is the beginning of genuine wisdom. The most dangerous people in history were not those who admitted uncertainty. They were those who felt absolutely certain. Unexamined, unchallengeable certainty is perhaps the most powerful and destructive force in the human story. Another essential skill is learning to distinguish between the quality of a decision and the quality of an outcome. A careful, well-reasoned decision can still produce a bad result because the world contains unpredictable variables beyond anyone's control. Equally, a reckless decision can accidentally yield a positive outcome. Good results do not always mean good decisions, and bad outcomes do not always reveal poor thinking. If we judge past decisions only by their outcomes, we learn the wrong lessons, becoming overconfident when lucky and unnecessarily self-critical when unlucky. The goal is to evaluate the process. Given what I knew at the time, did I think carefully? Did I consider alternatives and create space for doubt? If yes, then even a bad outcome becomes a valuable lesson rather than a crushing defeat. Taken together, these habits, slowing down, welcoming disagreement, and judging your thinking by how carefully it was done rather than by how it turned out, form something larger than a set of techniques. They form a different relationship with your own mind, one built not on the comfort of certainty, but on the courage of curiosity. Closing reflection. We have traveled far together in this story, from the humbled Isaac Newton staring at his devastating losses in silence, to the engineers at NASA who tried to tell the truth and were not heard, from the collapse of Enron to the quiet revolutionary research of Daniel Kahneman. From Solomon Asch's conformity experiments, where ordinary people denied the evidence of their own eyes, to the cultural paralysis that brought down a company that once seemed immortal. What runs through all of these stories is a simple truth. Intelligence alone is not enough. Knowledge without self-awareness can become a prison. Confidence without humility can become a blindfold. The most dangerous moment for any thinking person is not ignorance, but the moment when they stop wondering whether they might be wrong. And now I invite you to turn this inward. Think about a belief you hold with great certainty, a conviction about yourself, about other people, about the world. When did you last genuinely examine it? When did you last ask, what evidence would I need to see in order to change my mind? If no possible fact or argument could shake the belief, it is not a conclusion, it is a wall. Think also about the voices in your life that you find uncomfortable. The colleague who always raises objections, the friend who asks inconvenient questions, the family member who sees things differently and is not afraid to say so. It is easy to experience these people as obstacles, but what if they are your most valuable resource? What if the discomfort they create is actually the feeling of your thinking being stretched and made stronger? The philosopher Socrates believed that the unexamined life was not worth living. He spent his life walking through Athens, asking questions, not to prove his own knowledge, but to reveal the limits of everyone's assumptions, including his own. He was considered the wisest person of his age, not because he knew the most, but because he was the most honest about what he did not know. We live in a world that rewards certainty, that promotes confidence, and celebrates the person who speaks most boldly. There are genuine moments of crisis when bold certainty is exactly what is needed. But most of life happens in the quiet middle ground, where slowing down, asking another question, and tolerating ambiguity for just a little longer could change everything. The next time you feel absolutely certain about something, try this. Pause, just a breath, and ask with genuine curiosity, what am I not seeing? What assumption have I not yet examined? Who might think differently, and what might they know that I do not? You do not need to abandon your conviction, simply hold it up to the light for one honest moment. The greatest human achievements have come not from people who were certain they were right, but from those uncertain enough to keep searching and brave enough to look at what everyone accepted as truth and say, but what if we are wrong? That question, what if we are wrong, is not a sign of weakness. It is the most courageous human question there is. It launched scientific revolutions, ended unjust systems, and opened minds sealed shut by centuries of assumption. Asked honestly, it has the power to change not just decisions, but lives. Thank you for listening to English Through Great Stories. Today you have explored some of the deepest ideas in psychology, history, and human behavior. You have met scientists, leaders, engineers, and thinkers, some triumphant, some broken, all deeply human. Until the next episode, keep questioning, keep wondering, and never stop asking what you might have missed.